Everyone, my name is Christof. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Lisbon. It's great to see that many of you are still here. It's the very last session. I mean, there's still the lightning talk. It's great to see you guys. I also have to say that this talk is probably going to be a little bit boring, especially if you attended this morning. And so Burak's talk on the empirical study that we did on cross-chain arbitrages, because, spoiler, I'm going to talk about cross-chain arbitrage. But I want to start with a question. How many of you have heard about shared sequencing? Just raise your hand. Okay, quite a lot. Okay, that's good. So today, I mean, probably some of you have heard about this kind of use case for shared sequencing, which is cross-chain arbitrages, actually. And shared sequencing typically works on rollups. So what we wanted to understand, so me, Danning, and Malesh, by the way, thanks to them, they helped me quite a lot. So what we wanted to understand is actually, is there really a market, and how much of these cross-chain arbitrages are there? What are the profits? Can we compare them to single-chain arbitrage across rollups in the event of shared sequencing? So many of you probably know what is arbitrage. I'm just going to explain you very quickly what is arbitrage. You never know. So you know we have all these DEXs, and these DEXs, they act on isolation, right? You have these DEXs, they trade tokens, but they don't really communicate with each other. So they're like isolated environments. And some DEXs even trade the same tokens. And because they are isolated from each other, you can actually have price differences, okay? So if you have a user, for example, Alice, which is an arbitrager, Alice can have, for example, an inventory of one ETH, one wrapped ETH, and observes that actually one wrapped ETH on DEX A is worth $2,010, USDT, sorry. And on the other DEX, on DEX B, it's actually worth $2,000. So what Alice can do, Alice can actually buy for one wrapped ETH, she can buy 2010 USDT on the first DEX, on DEX A, and then she can actually sell 2,000 of the USDT that she bought on DEX A on DEX B. So making a profit of 10 USDT, right? So this is how arbitrage works. And eventually, like, this will help balance the markets. These isolated markets, they become now balanced, right? We are balancing the prices. So how does cross-chain arbitrage work? Essentially the same way. So we also have these isolated DEXs. The difference is that now we add a further layer of isolation, which is actually isolated blockchains. But in essence, it's still the same thing. We have DEXs across different chains, but they're isolated, and actually we can interact with them. So Alice could actually do, in theory, just the same. Alice can basically buy USDT on one DEX that is on one specific chain, and then sell it on a different chain. Now, the difference compared to single-chain arbitrage and our cross-chain arbitrage is that in single-chain arbitrage, you have this atomic property. You can have these atomic transactions, where actually these two actions of buying and selling, you can actually combine in one transaction. Okay, what that means is that you have this guarantee of execution. Both are executed at the same time, or nothing happens. And you also have this guarantee on the order. In cross-chain arbitrage, though, you don't have this. That's why we talk about non-atomic transactions. So because the reality is that you have two separate transactions. You have one transaction that buys on the chain A, and one transaction that sells on chain A. Now, there are two techniques, as Burak already explained this morning, on how you can do this, okay? Because you have this non-atomic property. The first one is called bridge arb, okay? Like arbitrage using bridges. So what that means in practice is that you not only have these two transactions of buying and selling, but you also have two additional transactions where you actually where you actually transfer from one chain to the other, right? So you have the first transaction where you buy, then you actually need to transfer USDT to the other chain, then you need to withdraw this USDT, and then you need to, and only then you can actually complete the arbitrage. So you have 4 transactions in total. So if you look at the pros and the cons, the good thing is that you only need one small inventory, right? Just like in single-chain arbitrage. Although in single-chain arbitrage, what you can do is you can do flash loans, right? Because of these atomic properties. In cross-chain arbitrage, you cannot really do this. But in the bridge-based arbitrage, what you can do is you have you only have to maintain a small inventory on one side. The problem, however, is that you have high costs because you not only have these 2 transactions, but actually you have 4 transactions. You also have the bridge transactions that you need to pay for. Also, you have the delays, because the bridge, actually the slowest part is not transaction 1 and transaction 2, not transaction 4 and transaction 3, but it's the thing in the middle. When you actually submit your transaction then on one side, and then you need to wait until you actually can withdraw on the other side. Okay, there's actually a very big delay. And if you're doing arbitrage, you know that delays are typically not your friend. This is not what you want. The other thing is that for bridge-based cross-chain arbitrage, order matters, okay? You cannot withdraw something that you didn't transfer before on the other side. You cannot complete the arbitrage on the other side if you didn't do it started on the other side. So these are the disadvantages. That's why we also have another alternative, which is inventory-based arbitrage, inventory-based cross-chain arbitrage, as Burak also mentioned this morning. So where you now actually only have 2 transactions. You don't have any bridge transactions anymore. There's no bridging involved. But what you have now is actually that you need to maintain assets, your inventory, your portfolio, on 2 chains at the same time. So in this case, for example, imagine that actually Alice has like 1 wrapped ETH on one side and then 2,000 USDT on the other side. So Alice is going to perform the 2 transactions, and then in the end, Alice is going to make a profit of 20 USDT, okay? Although nothing has been bridged, but like if you have a look at the portfolio, at the inventory as a whole, she made profit, okay? So this is how inventory-based arbitrage works. So to summarize again, the advantages: low cost because you don't have the bridge transactions, low delays because you don't have to go via bridge, and it's actually order independent. Because that's a nice thing, right? So actually you don't care actually if the second transaction or the first transaction happens first, so that the purple transaction or the blue transaction happens first. In the end, you only care that both transactions happened, right? And then you just look at your portfolio as a whole at the end. So you don't have this notion of order anymore. Actually, you don't care about this notion of order. The problem, however, is that now you need to maintain assets on both sides, right? You need to have a large inventory. That's a disadvantage. So from here on, I explained to you these 2 types of, these 2 different ways on how to do cross-chain arbitrage. And from here on, actually, I'm only going to focus on inventory-based arbitrage. As we saw this morning, this is also the most prevalent. This is the one that is most used and being done. So to summarize a little bit, the benefits of arbitrage in general. So single-chain arbitrage in general allows you to have equivalent prices across a single blockchain. And cross-chain arbitrage allows you to have equivalent prices across many blockchains, okay? While single-chain arbitrages are associated with low risk, cross-chain arbitrages are, however, associated with high risk because of the disadvantages that I just mentioned earlier. Okay, now there is risk associated to cross-chain arbitrage, but cross-chain arbitrage is actually good, right? We want to have actually equivalent prices across all the blockchains. So how can we mitigate this risk? One thing is shared sequencing, right? So the idea is that I have these 2 separate transactions, one buy action happening on rollup 1, one sell action happening on rollup 2. I can bundle them in a bundle, similar to like how Flashbots is working. I create a bundle and then I submit it to the shared sequencer. The shared sequencer is then going to make sure that actually both are being, for example, executed at the top of the block, okay, for these 2 rollups. So the research questions, or the questions that we were asking ourselves here was, how profitable is it actually cross-chain arbitrage across rollups? Only rollups, right? Because we assume shared sequencing, and shared sequencing is only happening on rollups. The other question was, how does cross-chain arbitrage profits compare to single-chain arbitrage profits? Because people are already doing single-chain arbitrage, and like, are they going to do cross-chain arbitrage? And actually, they will have to choose, or maybe they can do in parallel, but at least they need to understand what is the difference in terms of profits. And also, like, what is also interesting to know, or what we wanted to know, is like, how long do these cross-chain arbitrage opportunities prevail? I mean, how long is the window? Okay, how long do they persist? So we thought like it would be nice if there's a tool to do this, right? And this is what we came up with. So we created this arbitrage simulation framework. It looks very complex, but it's actually not. No, it is. So as inputs, we give. Sorry, actually, before I actually explain how it works, I want to quickly mention the challenges that we actually faced in building such a framework. The first thing is we looked at Uniswap V2 and V3 pools. While V2 pools are quite easy, V3 pools are a little bit more complicated, right? Because the data is available, right? Blockchain is public, But for example, we need the ticks, right? The net liquidity per tick. And this is something that is not really directly available. You need to, it's actually not really, it's not something like that is part of an event and you just need to crawl the event and you have it. You actually really need to actually redo the whole history and actually extract and maintain that value. The other thing is, when you're simulating, for example, arbitrages on Ethereum, it's every 12 seconds that a block is created, right? Here, rollups, they're much, much faster. So we actually need to simulate arbitrages, for example, in the case of Base or Optimism, every 2 seconds. So more simulations. The other thing is, and this is a general thing, is actually for V2, you can easily compute the optimal input amount, okay? For V3, it's a little bit more complicated because you have these ticks. The other thing is avoid double counting. So in a sense that we want to actually give an estimate on the total profit, okay, but we don't, since we are simulating and we are not really doing the arbitrage, right? It's really hard to understand when does an arbitrage really, when does an arbitrage really close, right? There's an arbitrage opportunity, but since no one is taking it because we're just simulating, we're really not doing it on the blockchain, right? We're not really closing the arbitrage. So while we will have a lot of profits across time because no one is taking the arbitrage, there's a big danger on double counting actually the profits. But so now I'm going to quickly explain the framework that we actually came up with. So the first part is this path builder. The path builder takes as input a list of Uniswap V2 and V3 pools. So we only use, so the tool actually is quite general, but we only focus on V2 and V3. And with V2 and V3, I really mean Uniswap V2 and V3, not like forks, like really from Uniswap. So that limits already a little bit, but this gives us guarantees that, you know, like the pricing and so on is actually the way that we expected and hasn't been changed. We also focus, so these are like 157 pools. If we look at Arbitrum, Optimism, and Base, and the other requirement was that these pools have at least $100 million in total volume. So after giving as input the list of pools, we need to decide on our inventory tokens. The tokens that we picked were wrapped ETH, USDC, USDT, and DAI. So once you give this information to the path builder, the path builder is going to create essentially all the possible paths up to a length of, you can define the length. We use for our experiments up to length of 5. So you have, it will generate you paths of 2, 3 swaps, 4 swaps, up to 5 swaps. And the first number that you see, the 38K, are the single chain, the total single chain paths, and the 47K are the cross-chain paths. So now we have all the possible paths to the pools. The second step, the next step, is actually now to actually fill these paths, okay? Understand when, like, fill it with data. So what we did here is we looked at all the Uniswap V2 and V3 events, and we created this event processor that actually processes all the events emitted on Uniswap V2 and V3 pools. And these are like over 300,000 events. We processed them and then we extracted pool updates. So for each, we chose a window of 2 seconds. So for every 2 seconds, we know exactly like the liquidity and everything for each of these 157 pools, okay? So this allows us now to actually go to the third step, which is like we have our paths and we have our pool updates. And now we can actually combine the two to actually simulate an arbitrage, okay? So we did like over 14 million simulations for the single chain path and 15 million for the cross chain paths. And in the end, we came up with, so we detected 14,000 single chain arbitrage opportunities and 57,000 cross chain arbitrage opportunities. So this is the whole framework. The framework just requires you to give this list of pools, choose inventory tokens, and then just like give the data of events, and then it will automatically create the data set and simulate stuff for you. In this case, simulate arbitrages for you. All right, let's talk about the results a little bit. So first, is cross-chain arbitrage more profitable than single-chain arbitrage? Yes, it is. I mean, we already know from Burak's talk. So this is basically the maximum amount that we detected with our, so our window was 24 hours, okay? So this was, for single arbitrage, the maximum amount was, a cross-chain arbitrage was over $500. For single-chain arbitrage was $116. So more profitable. The average profit is around a little bit more than $4.50, while for single-chain is not even $1, okay? What is interesting is maybe this total value at the bottom, right? Which says like $800 for cross-chain and $170 for single chain. This value is a lower bound and it's very, very, very conservative. So what we did is, because of this, avoiding this double counting problem. So what we did is actually, for all the unique paths, although it might be that actually for the same path, like there are multiple opportunities, what we said is that once we observe an opportunity, we only count it once for these 24 hours in order to avoid double counting, because we don't know really when this opportunity happens again or not, because we are not really doing the arbitrage, so we're not changing the pools. And if you do this very, very conservative, lower bound-based counting, then we can also see there that actually in general, you have way more profits if you follow this cross-chain arbitrage strategy than the single-chain arbitrage. Now, an interesting question is the inventory tokens. Which tokens to use and how much do they matter? So for single chain, we see a clear dominance so our framework told us that most profitable paths are associated to wrapped ETH, like over 95%. This is what you need if you want to do, this is the initial token that you can start if you want to do single chain arbitrage. I should also mention that the single chain arbitrage here is cyclic, okay? So in this case, you would start with wrapped ETH and you will end with wrapped ETH. For the cross chain, we see there are two differences. So we see the initial token, right? And then we see something that we call bridge token. It's because what we did is, remember these three rollups, Arbitrum and Base and Optimism? What we looked for was cross-chain arbitrages that are actually based on two chains, okay? So theoretically, we could have looked at arbitrages that actually, like go via three chains, but we're limited to two chains. So the first one is the initial token that you use on the initial chain. And the second, this bridge token, is what you use then on the second chain. So what I mean is that, for example, if you have an arbitrage that goes from Base to Arbitrum, we started, for example, with wrapped ETH, okay? And then eventually we'll finish, still on Base, we'll finish with USDT. What this means is that now on Arbitrum, we need to start, so continue with USDT, okay? And then eventually we need to finish with wrapped ETH. So what you can see here is that typically you want to start with wrapped ETH or USDC, but then when you bridge, okay, typically the most profitable path associated to USDT and DAI, okay? And then looking at this famous rebalancing problem that you have when you do actually cross-chain arbitrage, it is independent of the strategy of using now bridges or inventory-based, is you need to maintain these inventories, right? And then the question is like, okay, if I always arbitrage in a specific direction, right, then I will run out of funds on one side, and I actually need to rebalance. So what our framework tells us, from the simulations, is that it's pretty unidirectional. So what you can see here is the direction, so from Base to Arbitrum or Optimism to Arbitrum. What you can see here is that over 90% of the arbitrages, the cross-chain arbitrages that we found profitable, either started in Base or Optimism, and they all go to Arbitrum. But going back, like from Arbitrum to Base or Arbitrum to Optimism is quite rare. Okay, so you really have this rebalancing problem, actually. But knowing this previous information of which tokens you need for the initial chain and for the second chain, you can optimize a little bit, right? So what you see here is that you always start on Base or Optimism, so this is your initial token, so you know that it's enough to maintain an inventory of USDC and wrapped ETH, right? And then on Arbitrum, actually what you need is to maintain this bridge token, which is USDT, is typically would be a good choice. Okay. So this does not solve the rebalancing issue, but it tells you what tokens to own on each side. Okay, in order to be always able to actually do this one directional thing. All right. The other question is capital. How much capital do I need? So I told you that inventory base requires a lot of capital, and we can see it here. So on average, you can see that you need over 50K of US dollars if you want to do cross-chain arbitrage. While on single chain, it's enough to have like a little bit lower than $700. Okay, so if you don't have so much capital, single chain arbitrage is cheaper for you. Okay, cross-chain arbitrage is expensive, but you will make more profit. So if you look now at the path lengths, okay, what you can see here is that most of the profitable arbitrage that we detected were of length 5, so long arbitrage with a lot of swaps. But then if you look at the profit, then you can see that actually arbitrages with only 2 swaps are the most profitable ones. Okay. And then finally, this opportunity, so like these durations. So we tried to do this estimate of how long does an opportunity stay open. The way we did is like we have these pool updates, and we have the simulation whenever like an arbitrage is profitable. So what we did is like, okay, there's a pool update, is it profitable? Yes. There's a pool update, is it profitable? Yes. There's a pool update, is it profitable? No. Okay, so this means that the arbitrage has closed. Okay, so this gives us a rough estimation. And what we can deduct from this is that on average, like these opportunities, they last, so these cross-chain arbitrage opportunities, they last for 1 minute. And if you look at as a whole, then we can see that actually 50% last 1 minute or more, okay? And 6% even last 10 minutes or more. So this is good news for shared sequencers, like if they're slow or if it might take a lot of time. So to conclude, I know I'm a bit over time, but I'm concluding now, so that's good. So cross-chain arbitrages are more profitable than single-chain arbitrages, and they are profitable across rollups with an average of $4.5 for cross-chain and 76 cents for single-chain. Shared sequencing can provide the basis actually for cross-chain arbitrage, with over 50% of the arbitrages the opportunities lasting at least 1 minute. Shorter paths actually provide higher profits. You don't need to focus so much on long paths, with 5 swaps. 2 to 3 swaps already gives you 60% of the profits. And finally, one of the big limitations of our study currently is that it's only for 24 hours. Okay, so we only did this simulation for 24 hours. It's also a heavy simulation, as you saw. And that's it. Thank you for your attention. I mean, feel free to drop me a message. So it is publicly available.
Questions?
Yeah, I feel like much of this cross-chain arbitrage should be preempted by SEX-DEX arbitrage, right? So I wonder if there is a particular reason for why much of it or most of it appears. Is it because there is something uninformed happening on one of the chains? Is it because we are looking at tokens mostly that are not traded on SEXs? And then if you are looking at tokens that are traded on SEXs, then it would be useful to look at SEX prices and perhaps figure out which chain is wrong, right? So at some point, if there is an arbitrage between base and arbitrum, and in particular, given that you showed that it's mostly in one direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there a particular reason why one chain is consistently off relative to another?
That's a really good question. I mean, so we didn't look into SEX-DEX. This is something actually that we wanted to look at. So the ideal thing would be to compare single chain, cross chain, and SEX-DEX, right, as a whole. But we didn't manage to do it, so I cannot really tell you why. But probably there are tokens in the middle that are not listed on SEX or something like that. But this is like now me just like assuming stuff, right? I don't know. But I agree it's really interesting to look at because this is happening today, right? There's a lot of SEX-DEX happening. And ignoring it is actually wrong. Yeah.
Did you have a theory for why Arbitrum was the destination for so many?
No, I have no clue, honestly. I don't know.
More questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I think Arbitrum would be the destination chain because it has faster block times, so probably
so the prices change more often. Yeah, makes sense.
So that's not my question. My question would be, if you have to hold inventory on both chains, do you not incur impermanent loss of that asset? And if you want to hedge against that, you'll probably have to pay a premium. And would that offset the more profit of cross-chain arbitrage?
Yeah. So you're right with the loss. This is true. This is something that we don't simulate in the framework. You're right. This is correct. We are ignoring it. So this could be a nice extension. It's open source. The other question was related to what was the other question again?
If that is calculated into the...
Yeah. No. I mean, so we don't really calculate it. What we did is we calculated in the transaction fees. So actually we had a look at the average transaction fee for 1 swap, 2 swaps, 3 swaps. And then whenever we simulated, we actually also deducted the transaction fees that we would have probably paid for that time, you know, if we did these arbitrage. So this we counted in, but no, the loss we didn't count in. But you saw there is a big difference, right? It's like the average price is like 4.5 compared to not even $1. So I don't know, I might be wrong, right? But I assume that it's still profitable. At least even like we have empirical results that actually people are doing this and they're making big bucks.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering, did I read the slide correctly? In 24 hours, there's $500 of arbitrage profit across the sample set that you described?
No, this was the maximum. So this was the largest we saw.
Oh, this was a single trade.
Yeah, this was a single trade.
Okay, okay. I wonder like how much of, because you were just looking at Uni V2 and V3, how much of like the, just, I mean, you don't have the exact number, but in your intuition, how much of the total, I guess, volume or arbitrage opportunity that this study captured?
Yeah, so to be honest, probably we only really catch a small number. So the results really just represent a small number. Because most of the DEXs that are really popular are not even those Uniswap V2 or V3 ones, right? They're like Aerodrome or like others, right? So these are, we didn't actually look at these. If you would look at these as well, I'm assuming that we get different numbers, higher numbers probably. There's more activity.
Let's thank Christof.